Okay, so I am not going to go through the entire mark scheme with these essay questions. What I'm going to do is point some things out to you that are strategies for doing better in the exam questions, in the essays. So first of all, notice that the pattern is always 4, 7, 9 marks. So the first question is going to be more like one of your short answer questions. You're just looking for 4 marks for this. The 7 is going to be a slightly higher level. And here they're going to want you to explain, discuss, evaluate. But as you start to break the question apart, it's not as hard as it might seem at first to get those 7 marks. The last question is the hardest one, and it's the one that's more sort of humanities essay style, because this is going to be marked using a rubric. And we'll talk about that in a moment. So first of all, so looking at your command term, describe the role of soil organisms, and then we've got transfer and transformation. So we're describing the soil organisms, what they do to transfer and transform nitrogen, and we've got 4 marks. So I'm going to look for 4 different things that are transfers and transformations that involve soil organisms. Okay, so some of you talked about worms making burrows in the soil, and so then that would allow the flow of water or nutrients through the soil, so that would be a transfer, right? And transfers are a lot harder to identify than transformations, because in a transfer, it's really important that there's no changes. So the material is not changing in any way. Okay, it's just being moved from one location to another. And so the very best one here is that the soil organisms move the soil around, and that will move the nutrients around. Transformations, on the other hand, you've got your bacteria that are converting atmospheric nitrogen into available nitrogen like ammonia or nitrates or nitrites, and vice versa. Your denitrifying bacteria are converting them back into atmospheric nitrogen. You've got digestion on the parts of organisms like worms. You've got decomposition from fungi, and all of these are in the soil, and all of these are impacting nitrogen. Okay, so it's just a matter of thinking about, right, well, they're asking me 2 things, and they're offering me 4 marks. How are they likely to split that up? Okay, it might be the case sometimes in the mark scheme where they say you've got to have 2 of these and you've got to have 2 of these. They didn't in this case. So in this case, you could have 3 transformations and just 1 transfer, and that was fine. Okay, now I think the thing too is that with ESS questions, they can be quite hard when you first read them, but as you break them apart, they'll become easier. So now we're going to discuss. So with discussing, we're looking at lots of different angles. This is my brain looking at things from all different kinds of angles and having a discussion. Imagine sitting down over coffee and having a discussion about, can you view soil as a system? And if I can view it as a system, how could it help me as a farmer to understand and reduce the causes of soil degradation? So what do I do first? So first I'm going to think about soil as a system. Well, what are my inputs? Right? That's part of a system. So my inputs to my soil. And what are my outputs? And what are my flows and my storages? Now when I start thinking about this, if I think about my output, okay, now I start to see where the question might be going, because, okay, an output from soil could be erosion. Well, now if I think about this as a system and I see, oh yeah, erosion, what can I do maybe to stop? So maybe I can put a barrier, like a hedge I don't mean to draw this in the system, but as an actual farmer, I could plant a hedge because I've identified erosion as an output. And similarly, maybe my inputs, I think, okay, what are all the things I'm putting in my soil? So I put fertilizers in my soil. Does that do anything to affect my outputs and my erosion? Well, it can actually, because your fertilizers can affect your soil microorganisms, and the soil microorganisms are part of that humus, part of that organic matter that's conditioning your soil and leading it to be of a better quality. So with the better quality, you're going to get more plants growing, so you're going to get less erosion. So you start to think through all of these things. So it's really good to break the question apart. What do you know? So I know about systems. I start to draw a system diagram without knowing where I'm going yet with this question. And as I do that, I start to see, oh yeah, they could do this and they could do this other thing. What are the other soil, what other things are soil degradation? Oh, I know, it's lacking in fertility. Well, how can I increase the fertility? I could add fertilizers, of course. I could also add some animal manure. And what are the processes that are happening? If I spray pesticides, the process is down here in my soil of a nitrogen fixation, for example. That might be less because I might kill some of the organisms that fix nitrogen for me. So understanding the flows, the processes that are happening in the soil could be very important. Likewise, the storages, how much nitrogen is stored there, perhaps coming from the animal manure. So as I draw my system diagram, I don't know before I start drawing it where it's going to take me, but as I do, the question starts to unfold and it becomes a lot easier to answer. So break your question apart, write down what you think you know, and then move forward. Now, the last question is marked using a rubric. And there are 3 sections to the rubric. The first section is basically you didn't really know the answer to the question. The second section is more like you didn't really go in depth. And then the third section is then, you knew the answer and to what extent were you able to, in this case, discuss the extent. Okay. How do you get up here? Okay, first of all, you need to use ESS terminology. So think about the major themes that are in the ESS syllabus. You might want to think about things like systems, as we just talked about, pollution, feedback, the use of pertinent examples, so your case studies. Okay, don't just give one example, give multiple examples. Originality and creativity, those are so difficult on an exam, right? But if you start writing, having got some of this stuff down, your originality and creativity will come out of that. Okay, so these are for the top mark bands. I'm trying to think what else is in there. Let me go over to mark scheme. Okay, let me make another video just separately about this. And let's go back to over here and answer this question. So, with reference to a named farming system, discuss the extent to which contrasting agricultural practices have led to soil degradation. So, we need to name them. This is where these case studies come in, right? So you might have like California, like industrial farm, industrial rice. and then subsistence rice. Okay, so we've got named farming systems. Now, what kinds of agricultural practices? So you've got the use of machinery, you've got the use of pesticides, of chemicals, sometimes in both, sometimes in only one. And which one, it might changes. And then you've got to talk about how that leads to soil degradation. So the loss of nutrients, erosion, quality of the soil or the texture of the soil, diversity of the soil, the microorganisms that are present that will help you get the nutrients out. Okay, so many of you answered this question, and also question 4. So I will put the information about working with the mark scheme if you look at the video for question 4.